It's Hey White Guo. I'm here with another video. I was gonna do one on like another topic that was kind of peripheral to this anyway, but with the protests that have popped off about police brutality recently and death of George Floyd, I definitely felt like I should like bring up that topic because it ties into the ones I'd already been talking about, capitalism and nationalism. And so I'm trying to be a little more structured, so I have like a list over here. I'll try to be quick though because I'm tired from work. But here we go. Police as a tool of oppression. So that's one of the first things I want to touch on. A lot of times police are used to serve the upper class and people with money and resources, because they're essentially the barrier that, like in Hunger Games, if there's like a wall that separated the people who have stuff from the people who don't have stuff, and especially within American society, but pretty much most capitalist societies, maybe societies in general, there's a kind of militant force to kind of make sure people don't take other people's property, right? And traditionally, like, I understand this kind of notion, and it makes a lot of sense. It's tied into like Locke, I believe it is, John Locke, life, liberty, and property. And I understand that it's important that people's property be protected. And I've been reading, I've argued with a lot of people about this online, about people concerned about looting and things being broken. But the problem is, things are being broken because people are being broken or have been broken. Things are being looted because people have been looted. And it's not an accident that these things have happened. Like, if you compare like all the things that have technically been robbed of African Americans specifically, but there's around the world black people, of resources, of like stability and just common human dignity, you could maybe understand why, like, the karmic relationship, I like to call it, between the injustices done to African Americans in the past and any destruction that occurs presently. It's not an accident, and a lot of these things were intentional. Police are used as a tool to maintain the existing status quo, and this is something we have to overcome, because rather than police officers being what people idealize them to be, defenders of the law and the whole motto of protecting and serving, they're failing to serve their constituency, the people who the communities that they work within. They serve the people, unless they're like super affluent. If you have money and probably lawyers, you'll probably get served, but that service is not necessarily uniform and quality, right? And we can definitely say, this is a polite way of me putting all this stuff. I usually have to go off on people or I'll go hard, but we're gonna go kind of be cool about this. Police don't serve communities, or are failing to serve communities uniformly and to the degree in which they need to be served, and with the ingenuity necessary and the transparency and accountability, which is on my list somewhere, yeah, there it goes, that is required for a position of power that they have. So anybody who has power, it's important that there be checks and balances generally on that, unless you have like the most virtuous person in the world. But most people are not the most virtuous people in the world, and I think even the most virtuous people in the world would be wise and probably even want that kind of to have greater transparency and accountability to ensure there's a balance of power. As things stand, capitalism necessarily, as I've mentioned in a previous video, draws a kind of pyramid within society of haves and have-nots. And for a while, there was a middle to that pyramid. But as time has gone by, the middle is shrinking, and more of it could be considered the bottom. It's going to be just top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid. There won't be like a middle part. And that's what capitalism's kind of innately designed to do. It's like in the nature of capitalism. Because, as I mentioned in a previous video, capitalism stratifies society between haves and have-nots, and have-nots. And it concentrates wealth. The people who are able to win at capitalism are able to rewrite the rules of the government that they are a part of and basically make it work for them. So it can kind of co-opt. It's like a virus. It infiltrates and reprograms to do its own bidding, its own service. So the people who are getting service from the police, there's people who are going to maybe have their properties protected, right? But What about the people who are being abused? What about the people, and then like, this is also kind of like an issue regarding people's integrity and like the kind of character that our police officers like they possess and they embody. We're supposed to, anybody with that kind of power where you can shoot somebody and kill them and you're given weapons to do so, or you can just beat them even, you should have lots of checks on your power. And there might be an argument to say, oh, they have checks on their powers, they have like some kind of review board or something, right? I don't really feel that's the case. And if they do, their union kind of probably defangs it. But that's something we need to seriously address if we want to see the police officers remain in any capacity. There are people who want. I've used to be a part of like Black Student Union for a very small second at my school, and I pop in still periodically. But I remember they had protests on campus about abolishing the police on campus, and their argument, like, I think I want to misrepresent, but during the time, from what I remember, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I recall all this pretty correctly. During the time, there were police officers on campus, like increasingly the case, and this was thought to be a thing that was going to make the campus safer. But when you have a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail, and so police started like handing out citations for whenever they could, and like kind of just. It became more like you're experiencing an occupying force, and instead of feeling like you were safe and protected. And the police station was like adjacent to the campus, so it almost seemed like excessive. If it was excessive, in my opinion, and I felt like they're being policed on campus. If they're bored, they'll go and find something for them to do. They'll find something to cite. They'll look for problems where it doesn't necessarily need police presence or intervention. And there are all sorts of there are stations on campus where you can contact the police station adjacent to the school, and it's not like they're super close. So this is like a micro version of what's like happening, I think, on the grand scale within states and cities, states, and the country, is that we have police officers who are maybe one from outside the community, so they don't. Either they have a sense of superiority, maybe, or they're from a different part of the same city that might not identify with the people that they're protecting. And so they might be brought in from outside. And this is the same as if you have like foreign mercenaries. They're going to be even more ruthless because they're like have no fealty or relationship with the people that they're supposed to be overseeing. So that being said, what the Black Student Union on campus challenged them with, which got attention and was kind of necessary to move the ball forward, was like they were like, we need to abolish the police because they're not doing shit. They only like really serve to like oppress people of color, and I'm pretty sure they were probably right. I'd have to do additional homework, which I don't have the time to do right now. But I'm pretty confident they were right. On that note, they did this for two reasons. They had told me they did it, one, because I asked, I was like, the only reason I could see argument, at least in the like preppy area I was in, for abolishing the police was, one, they were excessively abusing students and specifically maybe people of color, and they were already like black people were like I think 3% of the campus I was part of, or it's like insanely small percentage. So there's that. Then another reason maybe to abolish the police is, well, I mean, it ties into the same thing. They're just not of service to the entire community. And maybe they're being used against one portion of the community by another portion of the community, usually wealthy or richer, usually European American or European people. But not only. Could be just rich people in general. And it tends to be the case also, I feel, that lots of people who have money tend to want very vigorously to protect the things that they have because they feel like it's a so interesting sense of ownership and possession that they have, because they feel like I get the sentiment that they feel they have all these things that they themselves put together, but they don't feel obligated to give back to the community. And so what happens when you take all these things from the community and do not acknowledge them, is that, of course, the community will become resentful towards you. Arguably rightly so, I would say. And so, out of police presence on campus, and be the sense of like othering and the sense of second-class citizenship, and just unfortunately, like the color of your skin can kind of make you a target for, like, it's been kind of like there's studies been done that highlight how, like, people of color, like, you don't even have to have a study, to be honest. You could have a person of color walking into certain stores and they will usually be followed, whereas if it's a European person or European American person, they'll probably not be followed around. And that's just because, like, racial biases and racial stereotypes. Like, people are like, oh, a black person, he's going to steal some shit. Not necessarily. And also, that's, like, blinds you to people who are white who might be stealing stuff. So that bias ends up working doubly. It hurts the people it's being used against, and it's also actually hurting you if you want to be an effective, like, and whatever screening you're trying to perform. So let me see what else was on here. Yeah. Let me finish the Black Lives Matter thing. On campus, they did that for two reasons. One, the police weren't serving the whole campus uniformly and equitably. And then two, it gets media attention because it's a drastic measure. It's like a drastic claim. And it's part of like it's a black tradition to do like spectacular stuff. You know, there's a word for it. I'm really tired right now. Please forgive me. But I wanted to make this video for over a week now, and I've just been busy. So we're going to do this. Whatever happens, happens. I'll have to do more stuff later if I can. But that being said, those are the two major reasons. It's a spectacle. It draws the attention in media. And then two, it's kind of accurate because it's like highlighting that the police are not serving the entire community. And then also you can throw in 3 or 2.5 if you want, and say that police, when they're overpopulating a location, will probably go look for problems that don't need to be problems. And then 4, there's the training. I'll throw that in too, which is also on here somewhere. Is that police officers are trained, in my opinion, to escalate conflicts or out-escalate. So they'll try and go to 10 if you're at like 7 or 8 of like, and they'll say an antagonism of some kind, or what they perceive as an antagonism. And what's scary and sad is that for black people, just being black is seen as like kind of an antagonism or a threat. And that's also due to a lot of racial biases and stereotypes that people don't think about consciously. There are a lot of things that are racist actually are happening unconsciously. And it's not like the police officers have time or even impetus to go and really contemplate, did I go handcuff him because he was black, or did I do X, Y, or Z because he was like this or that, or they were transgender or something like that. Like, it's important people, like, maybe you should have like a philosophy element added to this so as to help eliminate some of the cognitive biases that, I mean, we just need that in general for the United States especially, but especially for police officers who have more power than normal citizens have. And when they kill somebody, they don't have to go to jail usually. They usually sometimes they'll even get paid leave, which is like gross if you think about it. It's like really messed up. I understand there are moments where maybe officers have done nothing wrong, possibly, and maybe they were put on leave and somebody's it's like a false story, and I appreciate that, but at the same time, maybe pay them slightly more so that they're less corrupt and have a higher quality of officer, and have them go through more rigorous training, rather than kind of like take kind of people who are gonna be excessively aggressive or confrontational or try to dial things up. So the whole escalation, or out-escalation rather, I prefer to call it that, is not, in my opinion, the best tactic for policing, and it seems to be a straight go-to. I'm sure they think it saves lives, maybe even arguably it does, but it's saving the wrong lives, in my opinion. And I know it sounds somewhat messed up to some people I've talked to, that, oh, they're thinking I'm like valuing police officers' lives less, and they're doing a service for the community. First off, we pay them for that. So it's not like they do this shit for free. It's not like a volunteer thing. And then two, it's like the military. Like, you don't hear military soldiers complaining like, oh, I gotta do all this stuff and follow all these rules, which are actually more stringent than for the police. And that's for fighting people and like enemy combatants in other countries. So we need to have that kind of stringency for the police as well. Maybe slightly more because they're in a domestic area. Like this is, or like within the United States is not a battleground. Like if you're overseas and like the Middle East or something, it's a battleground. Or like certain areas are just like very like there's lots of conflict and stuff. But within like a city, 90% of the time is probably not supposed to be of that tier of militancy, you could say, by the police. And what's frustrating is I see militancy by the police, but I'm not seeing very much militancy against the police until now. So, I mean, when there's like aggressive response to the police, we're actually achieving way more than with all the protests we've had over the last couple of years. Every time we have a women's march, I don't see women get more rights, really. You get like 2 laws or something, if you're lucky. Or they'll talk about having new laws. And this is because our system's just kind of like fucked right now. And there are people who have resources and power, the oligarchs who really run our country, don't want the things to change very much. Or they want to keep us fighting for like little incremental changes while they do drastic, horrifying changes that are actually against us. For example, the tax cuts by Donald Trump went overwhelmingly to the wealthy. Wealthy people during this virus epidemic, or pandemic now, have made several $100 billion more. They become far richer during this entire situation, this national and international emergency. And I already feel like I think I explained in the previous video about why billionaires are kind of inherently an immoral thing in our current society, and maybe just any society, but again, I have to revisit that, and that these people already have disproportionate wealth. Why in the fuck are we letting them get away with even more? And then the tax cuts will probably make sure that they don't pay taxes on the additional wealth that they just got. So I mean, or they don't pay proportionally anything close to what a normal poor person or somebody like who's working poor, or like working person or middle class would have to pay. A middle class person probably pays proportionally far more of their income than fucking like a billionaire pays. And I'm pretty sure Warren Buffett had a thing where he complained about how his secretary paid higher taxes than he did. And he's a billionaire. He kind of gets it at least. I think most billionaires don't really get it. And I used to think Bill Gates got it, and he was like, but him and his wife have gone like, I've started to have quite the opposite feeling about them. So I'm starting to think that like they're just neoliberals also, which I should also do a video on. But again, back to police. Police as an institution have only, all right, I want to say only, but primarily been used as a tool against people of color and poor people to maintain the status quo. And it's not like they're serving uniformly, and they treat certain people like extra good. In fact, it's a reflection, you could argue, of what our capitalist system is. Just like certain people have insanely high level of wealth versus majority of people have like kind of not that much, and some people have like nothing. Same thing goes for our policing system. It reflects capitalism. Some people get like generally good service. Most people don't get the same degree of service as like, or justice, we'll say. Can't buy as much justice because they don't have the resources and money. So if like a homeless person gets murdered, they're not gonna like be able to do as much or like care as much about that. But if like somebody's uncle that was like if Bill Gates' cousin or something gets killed, they'll probably go all out. And this is, of course, I'm going to argue that this is like a over 51% thing, maybe over 60% thing for police departments. I'd like to believe, I'm trying to be charitable, that there are, of course, good people who work in these jobs. However, the institutions themselves are not innately good, and they have not been structured to be good. And without transparency and accountability to the communities that they serve, they probably cannot be good. Like, except for maybe in the entirely theoretical universe where you're like it's like almost imaginary at that point. It's possible, but very, very unlikely. So let's see if I missed anything. Alright, I'm going to jump on to another topic before I run out of time. I'm going to stop at 25 minutes this time. Alright, so before I run into another problem, I just want to end the police thing. So yeah, I hope I've made the case in part, and like, I'd like to go deeper, but I hope I've made a decent case for why police are a problem in society, and they don't really serve people, and that's why people are turning against them. If they had these checks and power on their power, and they just don't have tamper-proof body cameras, or that they can't turn off while they're on working, or having a community review board that can get them can punish them, or have docking of their pay in some way for infractions upon their action, failing to do their job professionally and appropriately, and with a cool mentality. We shouldn't be just taking anybody to be a police officer. That's like giving anybody power that doesn't exhibit the ethics or character necessary to do the job. I understand there's lots of harsh stuff in policing, but we have people who are soldiers who tend to do a great job overseas. And again, soldiers are not perfect, again, but I would argue our military behaves far better in general than our police overall. And so that's what we want, is to improve upon what we're doing. Otherwise, we just have to scrap everything. And there are people who don't want to do that, so I'm trying to offer a compromise option. Alright, next is people want normal to return, and normal's not going to return because our society has been, first of all, it's been compromised significantly by capitalism and by our president, who represents that. Our president and his administration have basically, they've made it excessively difficult to have a normal again. And it's probably actually a blessing in disguise, because people were under the guise that they could slowly change everything. And slowly things would change, or they would never change. And more likely they would never change. That's why we still have a lot of the racism we have. That's why we still have black people in prison, or brown people and people of color in prison. That's why so many people are still in poverty, and so few people have concentrated wealth. So these are things that are, I think, inherently bad for society, which I explained in a previous video about capitalism. But I'm gonna skip that. The key here is the whole concept of, oh, we'll just go back to normal, I'll get another job, I'll do X, Y, and Z. The stuff that you told you were going to be able to do is going to increasingly not be able to be achieved, because our society is currently, and for a while, has been quite dysfunctional. Let's see. Next on that list was, why is it dysfunctional? Because nobody wants to pay the tab on justice. Unfortunately, somebody has to go out there and enact conflict, we'll call it, and self-defense militantly in order to change the existing situation. People have to willingly put themselves in positions where they might end up getting punished for it in order to move the system in a better direction. And nobody wants to be that person, and we wouldn't even need people to be in that position if over half of the society were virtuous enough as a whole. And then, it could be that over half the society is virtuous enough, but they're not distributed evenly. So of course, that also is a major problem. And I think that's what the Electoral College does, is that we have plenty of at least decent people, right? But they're probably concentrated in a couple states, and then other states, maybe I would argue, don't have the ethical development that, say, California or Hawaii or somebody, or Washington, Seattle might have. And even even these states have lots of problems that they need to address, but they're not Alabama, right? They're not Michigan, they're not Detroit, Michigan, which I don't want to throw that shade, but Michigan has lots of problems, bro. I don't think it's not a surprise. I think a lot of people know Michigan has issues. So some of these states have concentrations of people who don't have educations that would help them understand why some of the things that their values are either inconsistent or bad even. And they're maybe too desperate and working such long hours, or just don't have the skills to deal with all the trauma from generations of bullshit enacted on them by people in power, oligarchs. And so we can't really, it's not an easy problem to fix, and normal's not coming back, one. And the new normal is going to either be, it's going to be it's going to be significantly worse than this if people do not get involved. So people have to, it would not require people to go to jail as much or suffer as much if more than half of the people, 60 to 70% of people, were involved in civic engagement, and not just voting, and like direct action, and protests, and the gangster kind of protests in a way, the chain yourself to a tree kind of thing, or sit-ins and stuff, make shit uncomfortable and difficult. You don't have to kill anybody necessarily, or beat anybody's ass necessarily, unless they're gonna threaten your life. Then I would argue self-defense. Definitely be prepared for self-defense, which I'll get into last. I'm already past 25 minutes. Forgive me. Fuck it. We're gonna go to 30. But yeah, point being, people got to protect themselves, and if you just keep letting the system brutalize you, you kind of earned it. Which is, I don't want to say that I would say it that way, but that's kind of what's the case. If you're gonna just let people beat your ass, it's like letting the bully just keep taking your lunch money. You can protest it, but they still gonna whoop your ass. So unless you're gonna fight back, it's gonna be hard to get them to respect you, because it's pretty easy just to punk you and take your stuff. I would argue that people need to be. I'm gonna skip into the next part. Oh yeah. Before we go, I want to touch on violence for a second, because we just got into that. I love that's transitioning kind of smoothly now. Basically, state has a monopoly on violence, and usually this is alright thing, depending on what kind of government you have and how cool you are with it, and how fair and equitable and uniform it is for citizens. But in this case, the monopoly that state has on violence is being increasingly co-opted by oligarchs, people who have resources and money. People with the people who are afraid of looting tend to be the kind of people that are, and they're not even all rich, to be honest. Some of them just think they're going to be rich someday or something, or they maybe have a little bit of shit, and I guess they treat it they have this mentality that does not identify that they are working class, and they probably should share shit or work together. And they're like, no, this does mine. I'm not going to give it to you unless I feel like I should give it to you. And I can see that maybe with a popsicle, but with a lot of stuff in society, you could probably get a lot more if we all just worked a little bit more together. But our society kind of pits us against each other and makes us fucking desperate and kind of more ruthless. And until we can achieve solidarity, it's going to be hard to beat that. But the monopoly of violence by the state is tied into the social contract, and social contract essentially is I'm going to distill it very, very simplify as much as possible. You have the state of nature, and then you have a social contract to not be in the state of nature, according to Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes was yeah, just if we didn't have society, we just could get wrecked, and people could take our stuff, and it could work in reverse too, and we just be constantly at it with each other. Now, there are people who have more romantic view. It's more the Rousseau kind of person. But, I would argue Thomas Hobbes wasn't wrong on that necessarily, right? I think they're pretty right. More right than wrong. That we don't want to be in a situation where people are just, beating our ass and taking our shit because they can. But what the fuck is happening now? If you think about it, that's kind of how American society works. And for a long time, it just wasn't necessarily as aimed at its own citizens. It was usually aimed at other countries, say Vietnam or the Middle East. But I digress. That's just wanted to touch on that for a second. So the monopoly of state is only justified in that it is serving the community. Even I took actually a class on social contracts. It's been a while, but I might be rusty, but I remember core content. And basically, if the system is failing you, and basically putting you in a situation that is equal to or worse than the state of nature, then you technically have a right to fuck people up, if they're threatening your life. And most people would agree across the board that generally you have a right to self-defense. So if people are brutalizing you, I would argue that you should be prepared to defend yourself and be militant. Don't be like reactive, be proactive. Like, instead of like, maybe we need to shift into community policing. That would be interesting. I was talking to a Sikh friend of mine a long time ago about that, and I didn't really like. I guess it was a thing that happens in the Sikh community more so, but maybe that's something that would benefit us if the currently police are not, or if currently police are an institution that serves capitalism and oppression and oligarchs. Then maybe we need to do our own version of that and just like stop relying on them, and then maybe get rid of them if it comes down to that. I'm trying to be open to all reasonable options that will preserve life and allow human flourishing. But I mean, if people don't want to change, and like if the system is especially hostile to reform, then fuck it, get rid of the shit. That's how the social contract works. If it's not a mutually beneficial contract and it's not better than state of nature, then fuck it, get rid of the shit. I probably shouldn't curse, but it's that serious. So yeah, state technically doesn't. It only has a monopoly on violence while it's doing its job. If it ceases to do its job, you have a technically right, and it's like a pragmatic right even, to just like say fuck it, or like get out of here, or like defend yourself from it, and organize against it. It's like all these people are like libertarians, especially for some reason, or fantasize about like fighting an oppressive regime, but I'm not seeing many of them fighting against. It's usually the left-wing people, or the some liberals, but especially the left-wing people tend to be more militant. Not all though, and that's a shame because we kind of need that. Let's see. There's anything else anyone? I'll save that for another video. There's a couple more things I want to talk about here, but I'll stop here. This will be a part 1. I'll do part 2 next.